The morning sun broke through a low veil of clouds over the Nebraska plains, painting the Mallister farmhouse in pale gold. Inside, Annie Mallister pressed her forehead to the cool glass of her bedroom window, staring out at the empty prairie. At 24, she had long accepted her role as the plains sister, the one with calloused hands, brown skin, and clothes worn from years of fieldwork and cooking. She was not the one young men lingered over at socials or sought out at barn dances. That was Evelyn, her younger sister, the family's pride. Annie was simply Annie, dependable, quiet, useful. "Annie, get down here this instant." Her father's voice cut through the still air, harsh as a whip crack. Annie straightened her faded calico dress and made her way downstairs, each step heavy with dread. The kitchen felt colder than usual. Her mother sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her father stood near the stove, face set like stone. And there was Evelyn, pale and lovely even in distress, weeping softly into a lace handkerchief. Her golden hair shone like sunlight. Her blue eyes sparkled through tears. Annie's stomach clenched. "Tell her," Thomas Mallister demanded. His voice held no softness. Evelyn looked up, her lip trembling. "I can't marry him, Annie. I simply can't. A rancher in Wyoming territory, living out in some shack in the wilderness. I'd rather die than go." Annie felt the ground shift beneath her. She had heard about the letters, the correspondence Evelyn had kept for months with a rancher named Jesse Hartland. The family had celebrated when he sent money for her passage. It meant a respectable marriage for Evelyn and one less burden for the struggling household. "You gave your word," their mother whispered, though her eyes shone with sympathy for her youngest. "I didn't know what I was agreeing to," Evelyn wailed. "Besides, Samuel Morrison has been calling on me. He owns the general store. I could stay here, near home, near family." "Enough," Thomas barked, slamming his fist against the table. "You took that man's money. This family's honor is at stake." Then, Evelyn said the words that would change Annie's life forever. "Then, let Annie go." The room fell silent. Annie froze, her heart pounding. What she whispered. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes, suddenly calmer. "Mr. Hartland has never seen me. Only a photograph. One where you can barely make out features. Annie could go in my place. She's better suited to that kind of life anyway." Annie's chest tightened. Better suited because she was plain. Because no one in town had ever chosen her. Because she was the one who always stayed behind. "That's dishonest," Annie managed, her voice shaking. "Is it?" Thomas's eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're both Mallister daughters. He advertised for a bride. He'll get one. And what prospects do you have here? You think any man will look twice at you when Evelyn's around?" The truth of it cut deep. Annie had watched men pass her over for her sister for years. Evelyn danced. Annie served refreshments. Evelyn charmed suitors. Annie scrubbed dishes. "I won't lie to him," Annie whispered. "Then tell him the truth when you arrive," her father said with a shrug. "Let him decide. But you'll go. You'll honor this family's word." The decision was made, as final as a judge's gavel. 2 days later, Annie stood at the coach station. Her meager belongings were packed into a small trunk. Mended dresses, her mother's Bible, a few jars of preserved food. Her father's stern hand gripped her arm as he warned her not to shame the family. Her mother pressed peppermint candy into her palm, her eyes watery. Evelyn stood apart, wrapped in a fine blue coat, her beauty untouched by guilt. Their gazes met once, and Annie thought she saw relief more than sorrow in her sister's eyes. The driver called, "All aboard!" Annie climbed into the coach, heart heavy, clutching her bundle. As the wheels rumbled into motion, she looked back. Her family had already turned away. Only her mother raised a hand in farewell. The journey west was long and rough. The coach bounced over rutted roads, stopping at way stations where meals of tough beef and hard biscuits barely filled the belly. The Nebraska farmland gave way to endless prairie, then to the rugged outline of mountains. Annie's back ached. Her dress grew dusty, but she endured it silently. The minister traveling beside her shared newspapers and gentle words of encouragement. The heavy woman across the aisle complained endlessly. But Annie's thoughts remained on the man who waited in Wyoming. She read and reread his letters by lantern light. Jesse Hartland, 31 years old. A rancher who had fought in the war, who had built his home with his own hands. His words revealed loneliness, though he tried to hide it. He wanted a partner, someone strong enough for frontier life, but gentle enough to make a house a home. Those letters were meant for Evelyn. What would he think when Annie stepped down from the coach instead? At last the stage rolled into Cheyenne. Through the dusty window, Annie saw men waiting in black hats, women clutching children's hands, merchants in pressed coats. She searched for him, her heart hammering. "End of the line, miss," the driver called. Annie descended, her worn boots hitting the dirt. The Wyoming wind tugged at her bonnet. She clutched her small trunk, her mouth dry. "Miss Mallister." The deep voice made her turn. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beneath his black hat. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his eyes gray as winter sky. He studied her with quiet confusion. Annie swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "Mr. Hartland, I'm Annie McAllister, Evelyn's sister. There's something you must know. Evelyn isn't coming. My father sent me in her place." His brow furrowed. "Your sister isn't coming." Shame burned Annie's cheeks. "I know this isn't what you expected. You were promised Evelyn, not me. I told them it wasn't right, but they wouldn't listen. I came to tell you the truth, and I'll understand if you want to send me back." Jesse studied her in silence, his gaze steady, unreadable. Annie forced herself not to look away, though her heart thudded painfully in her chest. At last he said quietly, "You traveled 5 days alone." "Yes, through half-wild country, to marry a man you'd never met. I came to honor my family's word, and to let you choose." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of respect perhaps, though his voice remained flat. "I see. My wagon's this way. You'll stay at the ranch tonight. We'll speak more tomorrow." He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing and walked toward a waiting wagon. Annie followed, her pulse unsteady. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least she had told the truth. And the truth, she reminded herself, had to count for something. The wagon rattled down the rutted road, carrying Annie away from the noise of Cheyenne and into the open Wyoming night. Stars lit the sky in a way she had never seen back in Nebraska, bright and countless, stretching forever. Beside her, Jesse Hartland held the reins with practiced ease, silent except for the occasional click to guide the horses. Annie clutched her shawl tighter. The silence between them felt heavier than the night itself. She wanted to speak, to explain, to ask what he thought, but every word lodged in her throat. "How old are you?" Jesse asked suddenly. His voice was deep, direct, 24. Annie answered softly, "Why aren't you married?" The bluntness stung, but Annie kept her chin high, "Because men don't look at me when my sister is in the room." Jesse was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "But you still came." "I came to tell you the truth," Annie replied, "and to let you decide." No answer came, only the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses. But Annie thought she saw his jaw tighten, as if her words had struck something inside him. By the time they reached the ranch, the moon was high. Annie's breath caught at the sight. The house stood 2 stories tall, sturdy and square, its windows glowing with lamplight. A barn loomed nearby, fences stretching toward the mountains that rose like sentinels in the distance. This was no shack. It was a home built with care and labor. Jesse helped her down from the wagon, his touch firm but impersonal. "I'll bring in your trunk," he said. "The guest room is upstairs." Quote, inside, the house was plain but well kept. A stone fireplace, wooden furniture, everything neat and ordered. Annie's eyes fell on the rocking chair by the window, the Bible on the small table, the absence of any woman's touch. In the kitchen, Jesse ladled out stew from a pot kept warm on the stove. "Eat," he said simply. Annie obeyed, the rich flavor surprising her after days of hard biscuits. Jesse sat across from her, watching. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Yes." "Keep house?" "Tend livestock." "I was raised on a farm." Annie answered. "Steady. Now, I can do all of it." Jesse studied her for a long moment. "You didn't deceive me," he said at last. "Your family did. Your sister did. Not you." Relief pricked at Annie's eyes, though she blinked it away. She had braced herself for anger, for dismissal. But his words were measured, not cruel. When the meal was finished, he carried her trunk upstairs to the guest room. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said quietly. "Rest now." Alone in the small room, Annie lay awake, listening to the coyotes cry in the distance. Tomorrow he would decide. Tomorrow her fate would be sealed. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Annie rose early, her hands moving through familiar motions, lighting the stove, mixing dough, frying bacon. By the time Jesse came in from the barn, breakfast was on the table. He paused in the doorway, surprised. "You didn't have to." "I'm used to being useful," Annie said simply, setting down the biscuits. They ate in silence, but it was not as strained as before. Jesse seemed to study her more closely, as if weighing not her looks, but her steadiness. After breakfast he stood calm. "I'll show you the ranch." Outside, the air was sharp with the scent of pine. Jesse pointed out the corrals, the chicken coop, the pastures stretching toward the foothills. 200 acres, he said. "Every fence, every post, I set myself. After the war, I needed something to build instead of destroy." Annie listened quietly. His voice was flat, but beneath it she heard something deeper. A man scarred, but not broken. "I need a wife," Jesse said bluntly. "Not an ornament, not a social prize, a partner. Someone who can face hard seasons without running." Annie met his gaze. "I know about hard seasons, Mr. Hartland. I know what it is to be unseen, to be second to someone else. I don't want fancy things. I want a place where I belong." Quote. Something flickered in his eyes, though he said nothing. Just then, a rider approached, a young man with sandy hair and an easy grin. He pulled up his horse and tipped his hat. "Morning, Jesse." "Morning, miss. Name's Jonah Cooper. Pleased to meet you." "Miss McAllister," Jesse said. Jonah's smile widened as he looked at Annie. "Welcome to Wyoming territory. Jesse, here's a lucky man." Heat rushed to Annie's cheeks at the open admiration in his voice. She couldn't remember the last time a man had looked at her that way. Jonah turned back to Jesse fences down in the north pasture again. Those Thompson steers broke through. Jesse's jaw tightened. "We'll go fix it," he glanced at Annie. "We'll be back by midday." As the two men rode off, Annie stood in the yard, her heart pounding. Jonah's look had unsettled her, but more than that was the way Jesse had noticed it. The faint tightening of his jaw, the watchful gray eyes. She turned to the house, determined to make herself useful. Dust rose as she beat the parlor rug. She opened windows to let in the fresh air. By the time Jesse returned, the house felt brighter, less lonely. Near sunset, another visitor came, a stout woman with graying hair and sharp eyes. "Hattie Rose Fletcher," she introduced herself, climbing down from her wagon, "your nearest neighbor." "Thought I'd see if Jesse finally got himself a wife." Annie smiled faintly. "Not yet. It's complicated." Hattie Rose studied her a moment, then nodded. "Well, honey, everything about Jesse Hartland is complicated. But I'll tell you this, pretty wouldn't last a week out here. What you've got, I can see it in you, that's staying power." Her words warmed Annie more than she could say. When Jesse came back near dark, he found Annie in the garden, sleeves rolled up, coaxing life from neglected plants. Without a word, he took the bucket from her hands. Together, they watered the tomatoes as the sky turned pink and gold. Later, Jonah joined them for supper, filling the table with laughter and stories. He praised Annie's cooking, complimented the flowers she had set in a jar. Jesse grew quieter, his gray eyes moving between Annie and Jonah. When the meal was done and Jonah finally left, Jesse stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed in lamplight. His voice was low, rough. "This house already feels different with you in it. One day, And it feels alive, Annie's heart caught, but she only nodded. Houses need tending, like gardens. Yes, Jessie said. They do. The silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of something unnamed, something growing. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The days slipped into weeks, each one carrying Annie deeper into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose at dawn, cooked hearty meals, tended the garden, mended shirts and harnesses, and kept the house bright. Jessie worked from sunup to sundown, fixing fences, driving cattle, planning for winter. They moved around each other at first like strangers learning the steps of a new dance, but slowly, their movements began to fall in time. One evening, while cleaning the desk in the parlor, Annie tugged at a stuck drawer. It gave suddenly, spilling out a bundle of papers tied with string. She gathered them up, meaning to tuck them back, but her eyes caught on the words, Evelyn's name, drafts of letters, Jessie's handwriting, less steady than the ones her sister had received. Annie's breath hitched. Dear Miss McAllister. One began, I am not good with words. The war took many things from me, including the ease of speaking to people, especially women. But I will try to tell you true. Annie read on, her heart tightening. These letters were raw, unpolished. Jessie had written of nightmares, of loneliness, of land that demanded everything and gave little back. Yet between the lines was hope, a yearning for someone to share his burdens, his silences, his small victories. This was not the man Evelyn had mocked as some backwoods rancher. This was a man who bared his soul, if only on paper. What are you doing? Jessie's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, eyes shadowed, watching her with unreadable intensity. Annie fumbled with the pages. I found them when the drawer stuck. I shouldn't have read them. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the papers. Annie braced herself for anger, but instead, Jessie only stared at the letters, his expression strangely vulnerable. These were the drafts. I never sent them. Thought I sounded a fool. You didn't, Annie whispered. You sounded honest. For a long moment, Jessie's gray eyes held hers. Then, with sudden resolve, he asked, Do you want to see what I wrote about? The ridge at sunset. That evening, Jessie saddled 2 horses and led Annie up the mountain path. The air smelled of pine, cool against their sunburned skin. At the top, the world opened before them. The valley stretched endless and golden, the ranch tiny below, the mountains rising eternal. The setting sun set the sky aflame with crimson and gold. Oh, Annie breathed. Jessie's voice was low, almost reverent. This place kept me alive in the war. I told myself, if I made it back, I'd build here, share it with someone who'd understand. He turned to her, his face carved by light and shadow. Your sister never would have, but you. Annie's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to tell him she already felt it too, this belonging. But words tangled on her tongue, I think. Jessie said slowly, I was writing to the wrong sister all along. The words hung in the air like a promise. Annie swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. I can't be Evelyn. I can only be myself. Jessie's gaze softened. That's the only thing I want. 2 days later, a storm rolled in like a freight train. Thunder split the sky, and rain fell in sheets. The east fence gave way, cattle scattering in panic. Jessie was already in the saddle when Jonah rode up to help. Annie pulled on her boots, ignoring Jessie's shout to stay inside. At the creek, swollen with floodwater, they found a calf trapped against a log. Jessie waded in, the current threatening to sweep him under. Annie's breath caught as he fought to free the bawling animal. Then, without thinking, she plunged into the icy water. Annie, get back! Jessie roared. No! Together! She cried, clinging to a root to keep herself steady. Side by side, they wrestled the calf free, but as the log shifted, Jessie lost his footing. The torrent dragged him under. Annie lunged, fingers locking in his shirt. With Jonah's help, They dragged him, gasping, to the bank. Back in the kitchen, soaked and shivering, Jesse sat wrapped in a blanket, his gray eyes never leaving Annie. "That current could have taken you," he said hoarsely. "It could have taken you," she replied fiercely. "Did you think I'd just stand by?" Most women would have, Jesse thought, but he only said, "You're not most women." His hand reached for hers, rough and warm. "When I saw you coming down that bank, stubborn as ever, I knew. I don't want Evelyn. I don't want some pretty lie. I want you. You're the one I'd choose every time." Tears blurred Annie's vision, but she smiled through them. "Then choose me, Jesse Hartland. Not out of duty, out of truth." "I already have," he said, his voice breaking at last. They married quietly the following week under the small church's wooden rafters. Hattie, Rose, and Jonah stood as witnesses, wildflowers in mason jars brightening the humble room. Annie wore her best gray dress, her hair pinned with a silver comb Hattie had lent her. Jesse wore his good black hat, his scarred hands steady as he took hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jesse's voice rang clear and certain. "Forever," he vowed. And Annie knew he meant it with every beat of his heart. Later that summer, Evelyn arrived unannounced in a carriage of silk and lace, all sharp smiles and false sweetness. She tried to reclaim what she had thrown away. She tried to make Annie feel small. But Jesse stood beside his wife, his voice firm as stone. "I don't regret a thing," he told Evelyn, "because what I have is real. Annie is my true choice, my only choice." Evelyn's beauty faded in that moment, her words powerless against the truth shining between them. She left in anger, but Annie only watched her go with calm resolve. "I wouldn't trade places with her for all the silk dresses in the world," Annie whispered to Jesse when they were alone. "And I wouldn't trade you for all the beauty in the world," he answered. The drought came, testing them with dust and hunger, but they faced it side by side. Gossip from town tried to belittle Annie, but Jesse silenced it with fierce loyalty. Each hardship only proved what they had already learned, that strength and love are forged not in easy days, but in storms weathered together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars rise over their hard, beautiful land, Jesse took her hand. His voice was quiet, but certain. "You were never second choice, Annie. You were destiny." Annie squeezed his hand, her heart full forever, she whispered. And under the vast Wyoming sky, they knew that no matter what trials came, they had already won the truest prize, the choice to walk through this life together, hand in hand, never again second best.